Hello, I'm Ian Wood, and it is the beginning of October in 2020, and this is a lecture about regulation, press and online regulation. So I just want to talk to you about the ethical framework within which we operate as print and online journalists. If I put myself down there in the corner, and just want to talk about number of issues today. So I want just briefly to talk about the reasons why we regulate, go through a brief history of print and online regulation, talk about the regulatory bodies, the most significant one being IPSO, but I want to mention another one called Impress because it has some impact on what we do. And then I want to talk about IPSO's Editor's Code, which is the actual rule book we need to operate to in parallel with the legal restrictions we operate within. And then I just want to talk a little bit about everyday ethical challenges. So I'll split this video up into a number of pieces. So I'll talk about the reasons to regulate and a brief history. Then I'll move on to another short video about IPSO and the Editor's Code. And then I'll probably do a third one for the everyday ethical challenges. So I wouldn't mind you just thinking about this question. Maybe pause this video just for a moment and just ask yourself, why do we need to regulate in a nation that prides itself on the freedom of speech? Why should we regulate what the media does or say? And that is true of broadcast as much as it is print and online, but this lecture focuses very much on print and online. And you may feel that print and online involves some of the more extreme elements of publication and journalism. So why do you think we need to regulate? Well, if you've taken a moment to think about that, I'll tell you what I think. Basically, what we do is very potent, very powerful, and there is the potential to destroy lives in what we do. And that can be seen through a whole range of cases, which you'll be aware of. So Kate and Jerry McCann, when their daughter Maddie was abducted, and in Portugal, the newspapers, Daily Express was notable in the way that it pursued them, and there was a lot of suspicion generated about them, about what they did, and I know they've been very vocal in their criticism of the press. Christopher Jeffries, we'll look at his case a little bit later on, but he was accused of, through the press, accused of murdering Joanna Yates, a young woman who disappeared from a flat which he rented out. And there was a lot of suspicion cast onto him through the media. He was entirely innocent. Somebody else did that. And another example close to home in Stepping Hill Hospital in Stockport, Rebecca Layton, a nurse who worked at Stockport Stepping Hill Hospital. Well, there was a number of deaths caused by insulin overdoses or maladministration of medication, shall we say, at Stepping Hill Hospital. And Rebecca Layton was arrested, and the journalists became convinced that she was to blame, and they started making it clear through the articles they were writing that that's what they thought. And she was entirely innocent of those crimes. Somebody else was later convicted. So their lives were pretty much destroyed during the middle of that. Here's another example related to the McCann case, that this woman, Brenda Leyland, was accused of being a troll who had gone on social media and was saying terrible things to the McCanns. So her behaviour is somewhat reprehensible, but she was doorstepped by a Sky News reporter, and she shortly afterwards she killed herself. So the impact of what we do can be very significant. Big exposés, and sometimes for the right reasons and sometimes for the wrong reasons, careers can be destroyed. So Sam Allardyce, as took over as England manager, was found by an undercover Daily Telegraph reporter to be negotiating for large fees and then giving advice on how to avoid FA payment rules. So he was exposed by that and had to step down from his England manager role. Might argue that that was entirely justifiable, but the impact is there. Destroyed his career with England. You may have come across this guy, Brooks Newmark. He was a government minister, and he was exposed as having got into a social media conversation with this person, or through this person's account, and he sent some mucky pictures of himself to that account. But it turned out that it was a sting, and the Sunday Mirror had set up this account. There was no Sophie Whittams. It was a reporter posing as a young woman, and he lost his job through that. Again, you can argue that what they were doing was exposing wrongdoing, but there was a big controversy about it at the time. It was just when IPSO, the new regulator, had been set up, and it was seen as a big test case as to whether the Sunday Mirror and a journalist should create what they call a honey trap, to entrap somebody into doing something by setting up a social media account of somebody who didn't actually exist. More careers are destroyed. Again, you might argue this is a justifiable one, but the former News of the World editor, Andy Coulson, he was sent down for his involvement in phone hacking. So going to prison as a journalist is a very unpleasant experience, I can imagine. And it also led to the destruction of his newspaper, the News of the World, that closed down after the phone hacking scandal, which we'll touch on. The scandal really raised by the revelation that Millie Dowler, a young woman who had been abducted and then killed, the revelation that her phone voice messages had been hacked into by journalists who were seeking more information about a story, and that led to further allegations that voicemails had been hacked into. So all of this behaviour seen as entirely unacceptable, and the impact was massive. People lost their lives, on certainly their reputations and livelihoods, due to the way that some journalists were behaving. So just moving on to a brief history of press regulation. First thing to stress is that there is a difference between broadcast regulation and press regulation. And it's really important you get this, so there'll be a separate lecture about broadcast regulation. Broadcasters, radio and TV, are regulated by statute, by law. So ultimately they are state controlled, and there are legal obligations within that for them to be balanced. Whereas for print and online, remains the case that it is self-regulation, and there is a right to be biased and partisan within that regulatory system. So be clear, broadcast and press, very, very different in the way that they're regulated, and have a look at the separate lecture about broadcast regulation. If we just go back in time, 1989, we had the Press Council as a regulator, and under that there was really seen as a free-for-all, and we had extremes, dreadful extremes. For instance, after Hillsborough in 1989, the Hillsborough tragedy, the Sun accused other Liverpool fans of pickpocketing bodies of victims and a whole range of other things, and they were seen as being completely out of control at that point. So in 1991, the Press Complaints Commission was formed to replace the Press Council. Press Council was just seen as a cosy boys' club, really. So the Press Complaints Commission was brought in to try and replace it. But David Mellor, who was a government minister at the time, he warned the press. Not really much of an online world at that point, but he warned the press that we were drinking in the Last Chance saloon. He was suggesting that we'd bring in state regulation of the press if we didn't behave, but in the way that people who threaten the press tend to suffer the consequences. In 1992, he was the subject of an expose, very famous at the time. David Mellor was revealed as having a lover, and the headline really revolved around the fact that she said he liked to wear a Chelsea strip during their liaisons. So he disappeared out of the door, but it was seen as the industry continuing to behave badly under the Press Complaints Commission. Diana, obviously we all know about Princess Diana and the sorts of reporting that was going on around her, and obviously we all know how that one ended. Rebecca Layton I mentioned, so that was the Stepping Hill nurse, and there's a picture of her looking, it's a picture they managed to get off a friend, I think that picture came from, and making her basically look guilty. How many more poison victims, they said, as they printed a picture of her looking somewhat worse for wear on the front page of the Daily Mail. More Madeleine McCann stuff, which basically accuses the parents of killing their daughter. And there's Christopher Jeffries. You can see the sorts of things that were being said about Christopher Jeffries, an entirely innocent man who was the landlord of a young woman who had gone missing, was later found dead. But the newspapers, The Sun, The Mirror and others decided that he was to blame. And so they just basically went ahead and printed it. So regulation clearly wasn't working, even at that stage. 2011, we get to the point where the hacking scandal is revealed through The Guardian, showing what was going on at the News of the World. But it was not just at the News of the World that the hacking was taking place. And at that point, because many of the victims of hacking were rich, powerful celebrities, they started to fund press reform groups. So the Media Standards Trust and Hacked Off were two high-profile press reform groups. And that led to the Leveson inquiry. So the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, appointed Lord Justice Leveson to lead a public inquiry to look into the way that the press was operating and to start considering whether there's a better way to regulate the press. And that, in due course, led to the Leveson inquiry. It called all sorts of witnesses, victims, editors, anyone to do with the press. I ended up at the Leveson inquiry at one point on behalf of the regional press. Manchester Evening News was chosen to represent or be one of the large regional publishers to talk about the way that we operate and how we operate within the regulatory code. That led to a report. So we went out to 2012, and Leveson said there needed to be a new regulator. He said the Press Complaints Commission was not fit for purpose. It said the regulator needs to be more independent, because the Press Complaints Commission was seen as being very much an in-house regulator. So there should be investigatory powers. They should have the power to actually look into things, force us, the press, to reveal information. The people who complain about the press, they should be able to access a low-cost arbitration scheme. Because previously the idea of suing was just such a high cost, because there's no legal aid to sue anyone for defamation. So Leveson said there needed to be a low-cost way of arbitrating an outcome. But he also said there needed to be a significant penalty, and said there should be a £1 million fine for the worst excesses. And the most controversial thing that Leveson said was that there should be statutory underpinning of the recognition body, or statutory underpinning of the regulator by a recognition body. That's the absolute key to it. So there was that led to this setting up of a royal charter, which basically enshrined those findings in law. That in turn led to the setting up of the press recognition panel. Well, you can imagine how that went down. That's what the industry said. So based on that, I'll leave it there at that point, and we'll come back in the next video to see what things happened after the industry had reacted badly to what Leveson had said.